This is a continuation of the previous video, so if you haven't already, please check it out. Here are some more fishing stories. The first one is from my brother. One late evening, my brother and our nephew went fishing. It was already about 9 or 10 p.m. by the time they arrived. The shore was very rocky with large granite-type rocks about the size of a person's head. They had a lantern with them and it had been burning. There was a light wind but nothing enough to blow out a lantern. The area had an old campfire close to the spot. Nobody had been there previously, so it was out and cold. They set their stuff down and started to fish. Not long into their outing though, their lantern started to flicker and dim. Within a couple of minutes, their lantern died. They didn't think anything of it, but they did remember that the propane bottle was a new one. They just thought that maybe it was a defective bottle, so they continued to watch their poles in the dark. A few minutes passed and they started to smell cigarette smoke. My brother smokes, but he wasn't smoking at the time. They looked around and didn't see the red glow from a cigarette. My brother started to feel around on the ground for a smaller rock. He wanted to throw it in the direction of the wind to see if he hit anything. Instead of finding a rock, he felt some fresh sardines, the ones that they use as bait, in a spot where they weren't earlier. Then the two of them started to get the chills. They started to whisper to each other, and the cigarette smoke got stronger. My brother said loudly, "Hey, give me that gun," to his nephew, hoping that whatever or whoever it was with them would hear them. However, the smell of the cigarette got even stronger. The two of them just packed up and left. While they were packing up though, they noticed that the campfire, which was cold earlier, had a nice warmth to it. Here's another fishing story. This one happened to my girlfriend's brother and his friends. A few years ago, there were 7 guys who went fishing. 4 were older and the other 3 were younger, but they were all in their teens. The 2 youngest of the group just went for the enjoyment and didn't fish. They all went to a creek where it was secluded. They set their stuff down and started to fish. It was early in the afternoon, so the sun was up pretty high. The younger 3 teenagers started to walk around. There were some large metal corrugated pipes that went from the farm behind them, through the level, and then out the side of the river and down into the water. The 3 started to throw rocks at the pipe, making all sorts of loud bangs. The 4 older guys started to yell at the 3 to stop messing around. The oldest of the 3 came back and started to fish. The 2 younger ones would stop as well, but every once in a while they would throw a rock at the pipe again. Finally, one of the older guys got so annoyed that he told them to cut it out. He told them to come and sit down, and so the 2 of them did. But as we know, with most kids their age, they started to wander off again. They didn't go very far but went closer to shore. They started to skip rocks across the creek. One of the older guys said, "You guys can't sit down, can you? Stop that. You guys are making it so the fish are scared and won't bite our bait." The guy stopped for a couple of minutes and then started skipping rocks again. A few minutes went by and then it happened. There was a big splash on the other side of the creek, no more than 30 feet away, as if someone dropped a 50-ton boulder from the sky. The older guy said, "See? We told you guys to stop mucking around." He started to reel in his line. The guys packed up and got the hell out of Dodge. That's why when you go out into the wild, you should never mess around like that. Never make too much noise and never throw rocks into the river. You'll never know what you annoy. In this case, they were probably annoying a Ja, but because they didn't do anything wrong and did not have any bad intentions, all it did was just scare them enough to cut their crap out. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. This happened to one of my nephew's brother-in-law. About a year ago, 3 brothers went fishing at a reservoir. From the parking lot, the hike down to the river is a good quarter-mile or so going down a steep hill. Because the reservoir is in the mountains, the water is never calm. There are always waves, and for some reason, for as big as a reservoir as it was, there never seemed to be any boats out on the water. Anyways, after a long day of fishing, the brothers started to head back to the parking lot. The oldest brother was up hiking the hill, with the second brother following and the youngest following closely behind. The sun was about 30 minutes from setting, so it was still light but starting to get dark. It is rumored that from the trail going back up to the parking lot, if you look towards the right side, you can make out a cave on the hills across the water. The cave is maybe about 300 feet away. Well, as the three brothers were about halfway up the hill, the younger brother and the middle brother were talking while the eldest was still about 5 feet away ahead of them. The two of them were walking almost side by side at this point, with the youngest walking to the left. The youngest brother kept on looking at the middle brother. Well, it just so happens that towards the right, or in the direction of the youngest brother's sight, was the cave. As they were talking, the younger brother's eyes fixated on the cave. The middle brother must have seen the younger brother's eyes and turned to look towards the cave as well. What they saw scared them and caused them to run up to the eldest brother. The eldest brother didn't see anything though. He was too busy making pace in the front. The youngest brother said that he saw a hand waving to him, motioning to go to it as if waving, "Come here, come here." He didn't make out a body or face at all. He said that the cave looked dark inside. All he saw was a white hand waving. The middle brother saw the same thing as well. The oldest of the group just stated that they should just get going. These stories got me thinking about things that could have happened to me but did not, thankfully. A while back, before I married my ex-wife, but after they moved away from this haunted apartment I told about in earlier stories, my cousin and I came to see our girlfriends. I would drop him off and then drive to see my girlfriend. When it was late, I would come back and pick him up. If he wasn't ready, I would wait for him in the car. Anyways, his girlfriend lived in that haunted apartment complex. There is a chain link fence with those privacy inserts in between them. These inserts are those plastic strips that they insert into the fence to semi-block people from looking in. The chain link fence separates the complex's parking lot from a field. The field is an uncared for field of grass that is as tall as an adult's waist. In the parking lot, there is a big dumpster. Whenever I would come to wait for my cousin, I would go back into the parking stall next to the dumpster and sleep. The dumpster would cast its shadow and provide me a good dark spot to wait for him. The only thing is, the field was behind me, behind the fence. I didn't think much of it, but all the rearview mirrors were pointed that way as well. Later, after he had married his girlfriend and I had married mine, the stories of the field then made their way to us. There have been countless times in broad daylight with the kids playing outside in the parking lot that they would see several all-white figures running around in the field playing as well. Just thinking about it and how I used to sleep in the car waiting for my cousin just gives me the chills. There were a lot of cats as well, and thinking about how the Hmong people say that bonsongs would turn yellowish or blonde cats when they would be seen just spooks me out even more. If you've ever had kids or been around kids who haven't lost their teeth yet, you will know that elders say that they can see things that we adults cannot. My ex-wife and I were living in a 2-bedroom apartment with our 2 young boys. This was before we had our daughter. Anyways, the oldest son was 3 and the younger was 1. The younger one had just started walking. One day, we were in the living room watching TV. The way the living room was set up, the TV was in the corner farthest away from the hallway leading to the bedrooms and the bathroom. We were all seated on the floor and turned towards the TV except for the youngest son. He was seated facing us in the direction of the hallway. He was playing, sucking on his bottle and looking at mommy and daddy when all of a sudden he frowned and started crying. He pointed towards the hallway. Knowing that there was nobody else in the apartment, my hairs immediately started standing up. I turned around towards the dark hallway and grabbed my son at the same time to comfort him. Of course, I didn't see anything, but he was frightened stiff and shaking. I tried my best to comfort him and staying calm at the same time. After a couple of minutes and turning him away from the hallway, he stopped crying. Here are some more stories from the old country of Laos. This one is from a friend of when they were younger. He was an orphan and lived with an aunt and 7 other kids. Most of the kids were between 10 to 14 years old. Their house was built on a taller hill in a valley with tall mountains surrounding the valley. The house was built at the end of the hill with a downward slope on 3 sides of the house. The main entrance is towards the flat side of the hill itself. The family has farmlands all around that valley on all 3 sides of the hill. The downward slopes of the surrounding mountains were still forested with trails leading to their house from other villages. On the left mountainside, there is another family's house about 500 to 800 yards away. That family is a family of a young husband and wife with a young child. Every day, the children would tend the farm, tend the livestock, and bring enough water and firewood to last the night and the next morning. But since it was closer to winter, the kids brought more than the usual amount of firewood and made a nice pile close to the house. One moonlit night, the children got ready for bed. The aunt was the last one to go to bed, so she went to close the window. The windows were the type where it was just like a door hinged at the top, propped open with a stick at the bottom. It lets air in but not rain. By this time, it was maybe around 9 or 10 p.m. at night. While the aunt was closing the window, she noticed 3 bright glowing dots coming down the trail on the right side of the mountain, the side furthest from the other family. It is said from the elders that when you see a lion at night, you can tell because of its 3 glowing dots, especially on moonlit nights. The friend telling the story presumes it is the eyes and the tip of the tail reflecting the moonlight. With that knowledge, the aunt knew immediately what was coming, so she quickly closed all the windows and told the kids not to fall asleep yet. She told them that something was on its way. The next thing they knew, they heard this emanating roar fill the entire valley. Immediately, they knew it was not the usual lion. From what the aunt saw, the lion was still at least 1,000 yards away, but the roar was as if the lion was already outside of the house. She quickly ushered the kids to go outside and start 4 fires, one close to each corner of the house. They were to throw chili peppers and some sort of sulfur into the fires. The kids scrambled and split into teams of 2 to each bonfire. They quickly started 4 fires and threw chili peppers and sulfur into the fires. The lions never came close, but it never stopped its roaring as well. The family and the lion kept at what they were doing all night long until it started getting light. The roaring stopped and they assumed that the lion left. By the time the morning came, they had depleted their large pile of firewood and almost an entire stalk of chili peppers that they had harvested from that year. A few days later, when an uncle of the family came to visit, the aunt told him about the lion's visit and how strange it was. He had a few SKS with him because he had come by after a hunt. When he left the family one of his SKS and some ammo, some of which were tracer rounds. If you don't know what tracer rounds are, they are bullets that, when fired, they light up so you can see where the bullet is going when you shoot at night. In a string of ammunition, every 3rd or 5th one is a tracer. It is still a bullet, but it has the added capability. Well, it was a good thing that the uncle left them that rifle. A few months had passed, but this time, it was a dark summer's night. It was in the middle of the night and all the windows were open. Everyone was asleep. All of a sudden, a creature by the name of a Leu let out its eerie scream. Back in the old country, some people speculate that this creature is actually some sort of bird. However, others speculate it to be a monster. In other words, you never really know what it is. Its scream is so eerie to people who hear it because it is said that whenever you hear it, somebody in your village has died or is going to die. At first, they heard it scream from far away. Just a few seconds later, the scream was closer. Then more than just a few seconds, its scream got even closer to the house. It was as if it teleported closer and closer. Finally, the scream came from the tree just outside of the rear of the house, on top of one of the slopes. One of the older kids went outside with the SKS and started to shoot at the tree, which was about 50 feet away. At that same moment, they could see tracers flying from the other family's house as well. The husband had come out with his rifle and started shooting too. At that point, the screams of the Leu then switched to a farther tree. They started to shoot at the other tree. Then it just stopped. After shooting for a few more seconds, they stopped and the screeches of it stopped as well. More stories from the same friend, only this time they went to a remote farmhouse. There were 5 of the youngsters sent out to the farm on one of the family's remote farms. The way they built their farmhouse is that it's on stilts. The entire sleeping quarters are on 10 to 12 foot stilts. The fire pit is on the ground below the sleeping quarters with a removable ladder that goes up to their bedroom. That night, the 5 youngsters went upstairs and pulled the ladder up with them. The fire was still burning, not so big but still burning nonetheless. Just a few minutes later, they noticed that it was getting darker downstairs. They slowly looked down and could tell that something was pulling logs out of the fire, one by one. They couldn't make it out, but they knew what it was. It was what Hmong like to call a Jalia, which literally translates to red tiger. The kids were all scared, so they just kept very still and stayed alert for the night. Because the thing took out all the logs, it got very dark and they couldn't see what happened. The next night, they expected the same thing to happen. They hung a grill, kind of like a barbecue grill, just above the fire and connected it to a container that had a lot of dried chili peppers in it. If anything touched the grill, it would tip the container over so it spilled the peppers into the fire. After setting up the grill and peppers, they went up into the sleeping quarters and pulled up the ladder again. Almost immediately, the Jalia came back and attempted to pull out the logs. But as soon as it stuck its head close to the fire, it knocked down the grill and the entire lot of chili peppers poured into the fire. There was so much chili pepper smell in the air that all the kids started to choke. The Jalia choked as well and started to cough and then ran off. It did never come back after that. I asked my friend, what does the Jalia do? He said that the thing will pull out the logs from your campfire one by one until it's completely dark. Then, when it's dark, he will come to eat you. He said that there's normally more than one, and they're always accompanied by Bansong. Quite a while back, I was talking to this person who I met online. We hit it off pretty good, so I decided to go and see her. Anyways, she told me where to go and to rent a motel, and so I did. After work, she would come over and we would go have dinner, and then she would stay with me. In the early hours of the morning, she would go home. The next day, she would come back before she went to work and return on the way home. She did that for one night. I'm a scaredy cat when it comes to strange new places. I can never get a good night's sleep until I feel comfortable in a new place. This is why I hate traveling for work. I always keep the TV and the lights on while I try to sleep. I can never fall asleep with the TV on. So what usually happens is I'm up the entire night until 3 or 4 a.m. when my body or my mind gives out, and then I just crash. But because it's a new place to me, I wake up pretty early as well, so I'm often up by 5 a.m. That leaves me with about 1 or 2 hours of sleep if I'm lucky. Anyways, back to the story. On the second night, she came over after work. We went and had dinner, then we came back to the hotel room. She stayed a while, and because I was a scaredy cat, she stayed with me until 2 a.m. or so. But because she was getting tired, she went home. That night, or early morning, I fell asleep shortly after she left for some reason. I had a vivid dream that I still remember to this day. I had a dream that I was right there in that room, lying down in that bed with the lights on and everything. The only different thing was that she was still in bed with me. However, she was turned away to the other side. I was holding her from behind in a spooning position. In my dream, I wanted to say something to her, so I slowly turned her towards me. As she turned towards me though, she was this horrifying rotten person with a partial skeleton showing. I freaked out and woke up, and because of this I couldn't fall asleep again. I just stayed up the rest of the entire night. That dream got me thinking, was this person who I was seeing a real person or was she a ghost? I'm sure the first night it was really her, but I wasn't so sure the second night. I left in the middle of the third day. Of course, that was the plan that we agreed to anyways. More stories in the next part.